Ne jana ko wo wo be ha den ste. Ne jana ko den go be ha den ste. Hey yana hey 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 yana. Ne jana ko wo wo yorth kwe be ha den ste. Ne jana ko wo wo be ne takis.
أكون عجبي شيء نعيش شعور كهوجش أكودي ولا بها إسرائيلية شد نو جوي السبب الكانك جو بيخشنا ولا جنو يجا على إن ليش ننا هلون أولياء باكون سن ليش جندا والخارج كيتعيش ولا به شياجة إن شخا هذا بقول جن بجنو جو إيخد إسات ولا نني إيخد باكنسن أحيانا.
When I hear the phrase "I'll with a bit," I think of when you are out cheering and you're trying to catch one of those last withers, and he flies through the air, headbutts you in the eye, leaves you with a nice bruiser, and then you continue cheering. You get it done. You figure out a way to make it work despite everything that may be mounting against you. That's what I think about. And then you plan the next butchering.
Man, there's a song from Bruce Springsteen, and it's our anthem song, because when we're down and out, I put that song on, and it says there's going to be hard times coming, there's going to be good times coming, but there's also going to be hard times coming. Swing that ball at me, because I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to work hard. I'm going to work as hard as I can to do what needs to be done. It's just being honest and upfront and working your butt off. Bring that wrecking ball on is all I can say, and that's what the word is that.
Ne jana ko den go be ha den ste. Hey yana hey 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 yana. Ne jana ko wo wo yorth kwe be ha den ste. Ne jana ko wo wo be ne takis. Ne jana ko den go be ha den ste. Hey yana hey 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 yana. Ne jana ko wo wo do teji be.
We are joined here today with an exciting conversation that's going to be taking place with Mr. Will Wilson. I am excited to also announce that we will also be joined by Kayla Jackson, who is joining our crew in a wonderful collaboration that NCAP is having with Art Place America grant. And so we can let these two wonderful photographers converse a little bit and discuss some of the intricate workings that we're seeing that's coming from Mr. Wilson's work here. So Kayla, without further ado.
Hi, I'm Kayla Jackson. I'm from Round Rock, Arizona. I'm a photographer. I'm not nearly as brilliant as William is. Mr. Wilson, may you introduce yourself, please? Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Will Wilson. I'm coming to you from Santa Fe, New Mexico, and this is part of my studio. I'm Kia Ani, Inshne do Belagana Bashaschi. I grew up in Tuba City, Arizona, and also in San Francisco, California. My Nellies are Irish and Welsh, and my Che is Tabaha.
And I've also taught at the University of Arizona down in Tucson. I was there for a couple of years, and also at IAIA here in Santa Fe, the Institute of American Indian Arts. And yeah, I've managed to make a career and a life as an artist and a photographer. So yeah, it's an honor to be talking to y'all.
I'm just so grateful that you're willing to share, Will, because at Diné College, we're not that experimental in our photography. All we did was just archival paper. The only experimental we ever gotten was printing on vellum and doing gesso on the back, or like gold leafing the back, which was very fun. I was so up for it. And we also would pastel on top of our images. That's the only experimental pieces we ever produced. And so I was like, I have to get him. I want him to expose all of the students to all of these interesting, viable aspects that they can produce in art. It's not just a pen and paper anymore. You could get digital, you get creative, you could make memes or whatever. So what challenges have you had to overcome as a Navajo artist? Did you have any challenges?
Boy, as an artist, I guess, as a Navajo artist in particular, I think, you know, poverty was certainly something that I think I had to deal with. I was born in San Francisco, and my dad, you know, he's white, or he was white, and my parents split up when I was 9, and so we moved back to Tuba and in that area, and I ended up going to the boarding school there. But you know, she was a single mom, and she was trying to find a job, and so I ended up going to the boarding school, and you know, my Shema Yaja pretty much took care of me during that time. She ended up going to NAU for a while and studied there. But certainly, you know, that was a challenge. I think something that was also instilled in me was the power and potential of education. And, you know, so I strive to be a good student. And there was actually this thing called A Better Chance, the A Better Chance Foundation, and they took a number of students. I'm not sure if they're still doing this, but there were a number of students from Tuba boarding who ended up going to East Coast prep schools. And so I had that opportunity because of education, right? So, I mean, certainly that was that. For me personally, I'm not a fluent Navajo speaker, so, and I'm also, you know, I'm half white. So there was this kind of, I think, I don't know if it was like a negotiation or a translation that was always going on just with me in kind of trying to understand the world and how to navigate it. But I think at times it was challenging, but at other times it was also very empowering, right? So it was something that I could rely on, or kind of understand that it was always possible to kind of persevere and to like move through hardship, and, you know, I guess also understand privilege.
When was the first time you actually bought your camera? Because I know cameras are expensive even back in the days. Like I had to take some cows to the market in order to buy a legit camera setup for myself. It was hard because I love my animals. And so I divvied out the money that I got and I bought myself a camera. Tell me about that experience. Do you remember that?
Yeah. I mean, after my first year on the East Coast, I came back during the summer, and I spent some time in Tuba, but it was hard to find a job, you know, and so I went out to see my dad in San Francisco, and I got a job as a bike messenger in San Francisco. And so I worked really hard that summer to save up money, and that's when I bought my first camera. And that's when I started. After that, I started taking classes. I mean, I had a fair amount of support through this foundation. So I was able to, you know, make requests for supplies for classes. And so that really helped.
How is your Navajo culture reflected in your work?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that initially when I started doing photography, like that was the subject matter that I was most interested in sharing. And so, you know, this is in the 80s, and this is all analog. So, you know, traditional black and white photography. I had a friend whose mom was an aspiring photojournalist. And so she also kind of helped me a little bit, but so just taking pictures of my friends and family and stuff that was going on around me, and particularly stuff on the reservation around Tuba, you know, at a cheap camp. You know, I took a lot of pictures of butchering. And one of my favorite images is, you know, when you get, I don't know what it's called in Navajo, but there's that layer of fat that you know, you hang up and you can wrap the achi around it. But it's this beautiful kind of veiling structure. And I have this image of my aunt holding it up and kind of before getting ready to dry it out. And the sun is rising behind it. And it's just like this glorious image. So those were some of the first images that I, you know, it was like this kind of documentary tradition that I was really drawn to. Later, I started thinking about trying to think a little more critically about photography and maybe about the history of the way that Indigenous people have been photographed historically. And I didn't want to be part of that same kind of history because in some cases, you know, I think that photography was used to kind of situate Indigenous people as less than, or as somehow, you know, less developed in the world, like through anthropology, for example, the history of anthropological photography. So I didn't want to kind of be part of that same history. So I stopped kind of doing that, and I kind of turned the camera on myself, and I used myself as a subject because I felt like, you know, I could at least take my images of my own kind of understanding of the world, rather than putting that on other people. And it might be useful, I don't know, maybe at some point for me to share some of the stuff that I'm talking about.
Yeah, you can do that right now.
Okay, just briefly. And then this is actually an image that my mom, and maybe it's an example of this idea of me thinking a little more critically about photography and the way that it was used to image people. The little girl in the foreground is actually my mother. And they were on their way, you know, from summer sheep camp to Tuba trading post to go, you know, I don't know, buy some stuff. And so she was there with her sisters. And they ran across an editorial photographer who, you know, kind of arranged this image. They were well supplied, and they wouldn't have been getting water from that side of the road, you know. I mean, they had, you know, hundreds of heads of sheep, and I think they were pretty well off. My grandfather had fields down in Curly Valley. But anyway, you know, photography can tell different stories. And this is some of the earlier work. This is me and my grandma, Masana, Martha at City. This is kind of me and some of my family, my grandmother again. You know, I just have this kind of documentary approach. But so I was talking about maybe thinking critically about how people were kind of taking these images in. And one thing, like, I ended up going to college in Ohio, at this place called Oberlin College, and I met this guy named Edgar Heap of Birds, who's a Northern Cheyenne contemporary artist, and he encouraged me to do installation and to kind of build kind of space and areas for people to receive my work in. And so I started doing that. So I started making these structures to kind of control the way that people were able to kind of view the work. And then this was my Master of Fine Art show, my MFA show. I went to the University of New Mexico and ended up getting an MFA there. But, you know, I don't know, this is, I guess, some of the ways that I was thinking about transforming the viewer's relationship to these images. So they just couldn't kind of take them and own them and have them. I mean, you asked about culture and how that kind of feeds into the work too. I think that just kind of conceptually, I think that I've also thought about, you know, kind of Navajo culture, like language is so important, and I'm not a native speaker. And so in some ways I'm, you know, alienated from that aspect, but I've always grown up around it. And, you know, in context, I think I understand a lot. but language is powerful, right? Like my family, you know, they have a nalgeha, and my aunt, who was kind of the bearer of that, she was always very quiet, and you know, I always asked, you know, I used to ask her why, you know, are you so kind of reserved and laid back? And she's like, you know, I have to be careful about what I say because you know, I can bring those things into the world. And so that's kind of stayed with me for, you know, I think most of my understanding of what I make, because I kind of want to be careful about what I'm kind of bringing into the world. And so I don't know, I think in some ways that has kind of conceptually informed a lot of how I make work.
Okay. How do you define success as a Navajo artist? Do you feel like you've reached your potential, or are you still growing?
As a Navajo artist, I mean, I got a best of category at the the Navajo Nation Fair.
Oh wow! But you reached it. Oh yes, he has the ribbon.
I have the first place ribbon. I mean, that's one way, right?
Yeah.
I would love to do some more work on the nation. Most of my work is kind of outside of that space. I also feel like, you know, being an educator is something that's really important to me. And when I see the success of my students, then that's often a gauge, I guess, of success for me. I mean, I would love to do more, and I'm really inspired by a project that I just started recently that's taking me back to the nation. I'm calling it potentially connecting the dots, and there's this map that the Navajo EPA put together, the Navajo Nation EPA, of 521 abandoned uranium mines. You know, it's a huge issue, and I'm starting to photograph them. So I'm doing this survey, and initially, you know, it's just about being kind of on the land and talking to people. A little less now with COVID, but you know, kind of being there and making the images and kind of being out in space and doing that work. But eventually I would love for that to continue. I mean, I know Manny Wheeler at the Navajo Nation Museum. I'd love to talk to him about maybe showing some of that work there. You know, and I've done various, I guess, projects with Navajo folks. Like last year, we did a project in Canyon de Chelly with some Navajo youth, and we, you know, used art to, I think, kind of tell people's stories and you know, use creativity to kind of make people feel proud about, you know, who they are and where they come from. And I've always learned a ton whenever I do those projects too.
So what process are you using with this new project that you're doing? Is it tintype? I know you do tintype in certain types of processes. Can you explain that?
So yeah, I mean, on one level, I think, like I was really drawn to photography because it was, you know, it was kind of a unique way for me to be able to express myself, not being fluent, you know, and I never really had a real, like, earnest conversation with my grandmother, for example, because she didn't speak English. But we were around each other a lot. But photography became like this voice for me, I think. And so I really kind of delved into it in an intense way because there was something, you know, interesting about it. Like you had to learn about a bunch of like these techniques, these almost scientific techniques to kind of create and make image. And so I think part of me is always kind of interested in whatever that latest technology is, and kind of strive to learn that. But in that process, I guess I also started learning about the history of photography, and went back and started doing some of these historic photographic processes. And tintype, for example, is one of those. And one of the reasons that I was interested in doing that was the first images known of Dene are when they were, essentially prisoners of war during the Huelta, at Fort Sumner. They were photographed with this process. And so it was a process that I was interested in learning for a number of reasons, right? So Santa Fe is a really good place for historic photographic process because there's a company here called Bostic and Sullivan, and they make all of these kind of historic photographic chemistries. And it makes it very easy for people like me, photographers who know a little bit about darkroom photography, to kind of reproduce that. So, but I'm also interested in like very new technology. So I have this project called the Critical Indigenous Photographic Exchange, CIPEX for short. And so I'm using this 19th century photography on this side to make the photographs. And there's definitely kind of this, it makes people look old-timey in some ways, right? So it evokes this history. But then I'm also wanting to kind of give people voice. And so I have this app that I've developed and designed with some programmers here in Santa Fe. And you can download it from the Apple Store, or the Apple Store. It's called Talking Tintypes. And there's a section of tintypes on my website. And if you scan those with the free app that you've downloaded through augmented reality, their people actually speak, right? So they'll come to life and kind of tell their story, right? And so it's my way of thinking about giving voice back to these still images. Free download. If you got an iPhone, I would, highly recommend that you check out the app. And if you go to my website, any of these images that are kind of activated, you can scan and the people will start to speak to you.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so the way you're explaining, the way I'm thinking about it is that every new process that you learn is kind of like a new language. Like there's tintyping, that's a whole different language, and there's digital images, and just you creating an app is also another language. I like how you kind of interwoven the two, like photography is a new language, and there's different types of languages in photography. As Navajos, we have different dialects from different regions. Like some people say like gohue, some people say ahue, and like it's pretty interesting. And I'm like, this is so cool. And like photography doesn't just like stop here; it goes beyond, and that's what I really enjoy. So, thank you for that. That's really interesting. Okay. Now, the next question is, how do you think that your work not only informs the future as art, but also the future of Dene people?
Well, maybe I'll jump in just for a second and take you guys and show you some of the connecting the dot images. I'm using a drone, right? Now I'm starting to put together a small kind of Indigenous Air Force with these drones. So let's see, I'll flip over to my website. So this is my website. It's willwilson.photoshelter.com. The images I was talking about before, the talking tintypes. So any of these images, once you've downloaded the app, you can scan them, and these folks will talk to you, or Carla will play the violin. Melissa Poachema here, the second person, the Hopi woman, we rewrote Princess Leia's speech to Obi-Wan Kenobi, except we wrote it to Popé, who led the Pueblo Revolt in 1680. And so she's reading, kind of verbatim Princess Leia's speech, but she's doing it to Popé. she's talking about the knot strands and, you know, helping to support the rebellion. This guy here, Chairman Schotten, is the tribal chairman of the Oto Missouri tribe in Oklahoma. This guy, Senator Haney, is well, he's retired now, but he was one of the state senators for Oklahoma in the legislature. He also designed the statue on top of the Capitol in Oklahoma. And it's interesting when you see him talk, he says, well, I guess really, first and foremost, I'm an artist. And he was also the chairman of the Seminole tribe of Oklahoma. Anyway, the tintypes, the talking tintypes, they let you kind of hear the person's own voice. The connecting the dots images. So I don't know if any of you have been up to Mexican Hat, but just below Mexican Hat, this site is, it's called the Mexican Hat Disposal Cell. And there's like 4,400,000 tons of radioactive waste interned under this kind of sea of rubble here. And, you know, it's part of the remediation effort to deal with abandoned uranium mines and kind of the legacy of uranium mining on Dene, right? And right behind there is the town of Halchita. And then behind that is Monument Valley, right? And so Kayent is a little past there. So you all aren't that far from this, at least in Salie. So this is my drone getting a little bit closer, right? So I'm zooming in. You can see my truck and a little tent over here where the cursor is. And then in the middle of that kind of field of rubble is this plaque. I think it's a kind of interesting kind of monument, a very different monument. And you can see the shadow of my drone. But I don't know. So I would love this project to turn into something bigger. Right now, it's just a kind of photographic survey, but I would love to talk to other people who are interested in you know, working around these issues of uranium contamination on the nation, especially in relation to water, right? Because groundwater is so important out on the nation. This is an image of the evaporation ponds that are part of the remediation for the Church Rock spill that happened, right? Which is America's worst nuclear accident that nobody knows about. This is just off of the res, north of Flagstaff, south of Cameron. And it's on the Babbitt Ranch, and it's a uranium processing mill, or the site of a former uranium processing mill. And it's right there on the banks of the Little Colorado. You know, and these depressions in the landscape, when it does rain, they fill with water, and people bring their livestock to these sites. And they're often not fenced, or, you know, there's very little kind of information about whether or not it's safe to water your livestock there. This is in Tuba City. You know, these larger kind of remediation projects are visually more, I think, interesting, at least from a photographic standpoint. But the rare metals uranium mill that I used to play in as a kid, the ruins of, is now, you know, it's part of this Superfund site. So these are all these drone photographs. And then this is actually in Southeast Utah. This is the White Mountain. This is like one of the last like old school uranium processing mills still in operation in the United States. And it's only a few miles away from the Ute Mountain Reservation, kind of upgrade from, so they're very concerned about, you know, water and what's going on. But I'll stop sharing. So I'm hoping that through this photography, and maybe also through, you know, a kind of growing body of knowledge around these issues that I can be part maybe of some either form of making people aware of it, or maybe even being part of a solution, right? There's this thing called the Tronox Settlement, Tronox, and I think it was Kerr McGee. Basically, the U.S. Attorney's Office found them liable, and there was about $1 billion settlement, and about a quarter of that is earmarked for remediation on Navajo. But I'm concerned. One of my concerns is that, you know, who understands how to do remediation around nuclear waste? If it's the polluters, it would be really bad, I think, if that money that was earmarked for cleanup actually went back to the people who created the mess in the first place, right? Is there a way to kind of advocate or, you know, talk, and I'm sure that this is happening on some level, that the nation figure out how to potentially, you know, I don't know, educate a young generation of hydrologists, like Navajo hydrologists, who can go out onto the land and do some of this remediation work, right? And then maybe also think about remediation differently. Maybe get some medicine people out there on the land to, like, you know, kind of spiritually remediate, or, you know, I don't know. It seems like it's a huge issue that not a lot of people know about. And I think photography potentially could bring light to that.
That's a good thing that you're doing that, because my grant is called the Art Place America, and we have to think of ways and how artistically, how can we heal ourselves? How can we heal a creative place, which is now a desolated land, and it's just contaminating everything, the water, the land, the people around it, the livestock especially. And how can we fix that? And art has to have a seat at the table in the discussion, and that's where you come in, and which is very enlightening and wholeheartedly that you're really activating for this. You're activating the talk, which is very crucial, because no one talks about it. It's been going on for years and years and years, and it's just sitting on the back burner. And what is the government doing for us? And exactly, like, we can educate young Navajo scientists. And I know at Diné College we have a really good science program. We have a lot of money that comes in from STEM, and maybe if we write something about it, that could be something we could start a conversation from it, which is very interesting. And that is so, it's sad seeing the land get, wind just blows on it like it's just forgotten. Seeing your images, it's like a forgotten place. And having a monument erected out of it, it's kind of a slap in the face, because nothing has been done, you know. It's like, here's a band-aid, let's just put a little plaque. It's just a band-aid for now. And I'm like, that's not really solving the problem. It's creating another issue. Yeah. Okay. So another question is, what advice do you offer developing Navajo artists? Do you have any advice for us?
Boy, I think, you know, I think part of the reason that I was so driven to be a photographer is to be able to express myself, right? And I think, you know, a lot of you are situated in a place where I think there's potentially really strong cultural ties to family, to language, you know, to just kind of the way of life that happens on the reservation or on the nation. And I think there's incredible value and power in that, and to be able to kind of own that story and figure out how to express it. And then, you know, I think the other thing may be to just the nuts and bolts stuff, you know. Writing is really important. It's like, it's really essential to be able to communicate, like, in the written word. I mean, if you can do it in Navajo, that's even more incredible. But to be able to kind of communicate through language, you know, if you're doing grant applications or applications for school or for jobs, it's essential. I think kind of maybe knowing a little bit about the history of you know, your chosen kind of subject or medium is very important. And then also think, you know, to be able to think critically and to, I guess, insert, you know, your Dene perspective in relation to that history is something that can be incredibly empowering. So yeah. What else? I mean, education opens up a lot of opportunities, you know, I think. And also, I would say, you know, find out who's doing work that you're interested in and reach out to them. I mean, now more than ever, I think there's the potential to kind of communicate with folks who are doing this stuff in different spaces and in places, you know. I mean, the internet is an amazing resource. It's just, you know, figuring out, kind of curating the sources and sites, and then figuring out how to ask the like questions, and what questions to ask are really important.
Yeah, that's exactly what my grandma would say. She would always say, education, education, because without that, you're nothing. You're just going to be blown around like a leaf, not knowing where to go. And I'm like, I was little, I'm like, I don't want to be a leaf, grandma. So that's why I'm always like, that's what I feel that is very true. And it has opened doors for you, which is 100% true right now. And talking with people, the kinship, the keh that goes with it, talking to people, even if it's off the internet, use that keh and that language, create a new language through the internet, which is something so unique. And we need it right now because we're all stuck at home and we can't go anywhere. We can't talk to anybody face to face. So I think more than ever, the phrase awołí is really testing us, because we're just sitting here and we're like, okay, we're kind of stagnant, and now we're like, what else can we do? So it's awołí, we have to we have to do it correctly and thoroughly and powerfully. So now I'm going to ask you, how do you explain the phrase awołí?
How would I explain that phrase?
Yeah.
The first thing I would need is I would ask to help me translate that. Like,
okay.
I mean, just like nuts and bolts, like ta wuslipe. Can you break that down into like
okay.
Linguistically?
So I'm not full Navajo, so I'm gonna give it my all. I was raised so like the way I would explain awołí is like you're just that like it's just like everything is behind it. Awołí is powerfully. And so awołí means, to me, it means that you have to go at it full force, whatever that you need that extra push to get you over the ledge. Like you're climbing this big old mesa when you're herding sheep or something, and the sheep are running off into the mesa and you have to get it. So that push, that nudge that has helped you get to the point where you're at. So did you ever have that nudge of when you felt that you needed that encouragement, that awołí? Can you like share that with us if you don't mind?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of, I don't know. I guess I have to sit with that for a second. But I mean, the first thing that came to mind when you started talking about that was thinking about like thinking a little bit more long term, and just understanding that in this particular moment, like if you're struggling to get something done, it feels like the world depends on like you're achieving something at that particular moment. But it's also, I think, important to think a little bit more long term and understand that, you know, I don't know, you know, in terms of a cliche, it's not a sprint, right? It's a marathon. And, you know, I think, yeah, I'm doing things correctly, doing things right, doing things like with a certain amount of awareness and being able to take the time and the care I mean, it's wonderful if you have the opportunity to plan for stuff in a project, but you know, I don't know, perseverance is something that I think is everybody has to kind of learn on their own way, in their own space. One of the things that it made me think of was I used to run cross country at the boarding school, and our coach, Coach Nuvi Estewa, he's Hopi. He used to drive us out, and he would drop us off. You know, it was like 7, maybe 5 miles, and we had about, you know, an hour and a half to get there before dinner closed, and if we didn't make it, we didn't eat. So it was like, you know, pace yourself, but also, you know, do it well so that you can, you know, you can eat at the end of the journey.
Hey Kayla, it's Christine. I'm going to go ahead and jump in because we do have some questions coming in from our audience for Mr. Wilson. I guess the first thing is what again is the name of that app? And if you could tell us a little bit about the inspiration that you had for designing that app.
It's called Talking Tintypes, and you can find it on the App Store. I don't have a version of it right now because I have this Android phone, and we haven't rolled it out on the Android store yet.
Android.
it's only on the app store. But yeah, I mean, I think one thing was I always wanted to, looking at historic images of Indigenous people, you know, I just wanted to know what they were going through, you know, and what they would say if they had the opportunity to speak to folks. And I think if I'm going to be sitting down and, you know, having this exchange and you're allowing me to make your image, I want to be able to, if you choose, to empower you to also, you know, have a say in how people are receiving your image. So I think on some level, you know, giving agency, giving voice to the person being represented was the motivation for that. You know, I think as a photographer, somebody who's kind of technically minded, it was a challenge that I really wanted to figure out. And the first time I did it, actually, there was a commercially available app called LAYAR, Layar, and AR stands for augmented reality. It worked. I had a piece in National Geographic that I was particularly proud of because, like, on the other page, one of my students had one of her pieces in there too. So, like, I had this piece in National Geographic, and they, I talked them into letting me give them one of the AR activated ones. And then in the middle of the publication run of that, it was the December issue in 2018, they went bankrupt. The people who produced this app went bankrupt, and all of my content just stopped. And so I started getting these emails from National Geographic, like, your thing doesn't work anymore, Will. And so, you know, I think it was trying to figure that out that really pushed me to get my own app created. I think I have.
Yeah, I really love that idea. It's just, you know, I teach a lot of the Indigenous resilience and decolonization classes here. And one of the things that we always say is, like, don't just complain about it, right? If you find something lacking, then do something and change those perspectives. And a lot of what you're talking about is that concept of, like, Indigenous sovereignty, right? And visual sovereignty that Halea Sinanjane talks a lot about. And so it's like a technological version of that you can hold in your own hand. And so especially now, like during the pandemic where everybody's at home and they're relying on their cell phones and technology at that capacity, it's like you have this powerful tool that is really unique to you. So that's pretty awesome. What do you got to show us?
Oh, I was going to show you, this is the issue of National Geographic.
Fancy, you are a fancy man.
And then, yeah, I'm particularly proud of it because one of my students her work is in it, right? So this is my student Kaylee's piece. I taught her how to do the tintypes. And then there's Senator Haney. He works again, but you have to use my app instead of the commercially available one that no longer exists. But the December 2018 issue of National Geographic, there was a whole section on contemporary Native American photography. I should say that there's an interesting development going on right now. There's, I'm on this kind of curatorial council, and the idea is to kind of decolonize the curatorial kind of practice around contemporary Native American art or indigenous art. And Halea Senegeni is one of the people who's, she's one of the elders, I guess, on that council, right? And she's kind of forced open this space. And hopefully we've kind of taken up her mantle as well. But at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, there's going to be a big show of contemporary indigenous photography, and they've invited this huge council of people. And so we have these big Zoom meetings, and everybody is kind of, I mean, the process is, it's a little more, I don't know what the term is, consensus based. And it's really trying to reframe the idea of how we're going to put forward this exhibit. And it's an interesting thing to be part of, to see that develop. I mean, historically, you have this expert, usually a white guy, and this person's kind of making the choices about who's being represented. But I don't know. I'll keep you posted on how that develops.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds great. We actually have a question. We have a whole bunch of questions coming in, but I'm going to go ahead and Carla, are you on the line? We have one from Carla.
I am. Mr. Wilson, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. And I teach art history, and a number of my students are on this Zoom call, and we've been reading about your work and your piece in National Geographic. And, because we're studying art history, I wondered if you might say a bit more about how the history of photography has influenced your work, and particularly your connection to Edward Curtis and his photos. Yeah, if you could just elaborate a bit, that would be great.
Okay, I mean, I know about the history of photography a little bit. It's something that I teach now, and I studied a lot of it in grad school. I went to the University of New Mexico, particularly because they had, really strong history of photography program there as well. And, in terms of Curtis, it's like he's the first person people think of still, unfortunately, when they think of images of Native America. And a few years back, I knew that his 150th anniversary was going to be happening, and I think that was in 2016. It was the same year that the treaty came back to Navajo. But I saw an opportunity. It was a little bit strategic on my part, and I framed this project, which I've mentioned before, the Critical Indigenous Photographic Exchange, as kind of a response to his work, right? So an Indigenous photographer making images of Indigenous people from a different standpoint. I don't have that much against Curtis. I mean, I think he was, a very driven individual, and he made some remarkable images. But I think the real story and the real power and beauty of those images is, the folks who are being photographed, and their resilience and kind of what they've survived to be present to make those images possible, right? And so, yeah, and it kind of speaks to my wanting to give voice to the subject again, but using a historic photographic process on, a very kind of basic level to show that, contemporary Native folks are still very much present. We haven't vanished. And we're doing kind of vital and essential things, you know? And so I knew that there would be a lot of these exhibitions coming up to kind of honor his, 150th anniversary. And I also knew that, people couldn't just put those images up anymore in this kind of woke day and age. They would need the kind of contemporary Indigenous response. And I was like, well, I'll frame out this project ahead of time that will, have some legs behind it. And so when it's time, and it happened, like I got a show at the Portland Art Museum along with Wendy Red Star and Zig Jackson, two other contemporary Native photographers. And it was interesting. That was an interesting kind of curatorial process because they actually brought us in early on and they wanted to know like what we wanted, how we wanted to kind of reframe this. And, one of my first kind of biggest suggestion was put our names on the bill, like put Will Wilson, Wendy Red Star, and Zig Jackson and Edward Curtis, like, because initially it was like Edward Curtis and Native American photographers respond. And it was like, no, I want my name on there. Like, this is a good opportunity, right?
It's an opportunity.
Same thing with the Seattle Art Museum. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing. It's even this the power of like naming. Like we talk a lot about that concept of naming, and like I know that there's a lot of students who are tuning in right now. It reminds me a lot of one of my colleagues, Cutcha Brisling Balding, who's a Native American Studies professor over at Humboldt University, and one of her projects was like her grandma was photographed by Curtis, right? So how does she give voice to that? And she's a creative writer and she did a whole bunch of like decolonization constructs with it. But this is an opportunity, right, for people our age or older or younger, if we recognize, right, those people, to just give them their name, right? How much is it to give them their name? So I think that's I'm glad that you did that. Let's see, we have a question that's coming in from let's see, a drone question actually, which I'm really interested in that because we're seeing a lot of that type of work come through now. With a drone, which areas would be great to see as an up and coming photographer on the Navajo reservation?
Oh boy. I mean, I was just out there. I just shot in Mexican Hat again. And then I was in Shiprock first because there's also one of these kind of super fun remediation sites, like in the middle of Shiprock, right? And it's right there on the banks of the San Juan. It's right next to the fairgrounds. But I mean, the amazing thing about the drone, just, from one standpoint, is when you're out on the land in Navajo, everything's just like the horizon, unless you're in certain places, but at least like out towards Tuba, everything is just like wide open and flat. But if you can just get a little bit higher, like 100 feet, it totally transforms the way that you see stuff. And I just shot that site in Shiprock. I mean, there's also a lot of beautiful things to photograph. Shiprock is something that I'm interested in going and photographing and seeing if, where I can kind of get a different perspective. My family sheep camp is close to the confluence of the Little Colorado and Colorado rivers. So, the Canyonlands out in the extreme west part, that's an amazing place to photograph. Especially with the drone. And I mean, they're remarkable little pieces of technology. They're super smart. They can fly in really strong wind, and they know kind of out of the box, like when to come home. So, you don't have to worry about it too much. Like I've flown mine out like 2 miles and lost contact, but it came home because it's smart like that. I don't.
Awesome. I'm not gonna lie, the drone stuff is it's definitely new to me. But I think also like what better place than starting off than home, right? Because who else knows the land better than you? And so you never know. You know those special places at home that may have a great right photographic intake and commentary that you could make just from home. Another question that we have, which is actually a really practical question that we've been getting a lot, has to deal with being an artist. How have you navigated the business and legal aspects of the profession? Things like intellectual property, permits and licensing, those kinds of areas. And that's coming in from Dallas Ellsworth.
That's a really good question. I mean, early on, I had the opportunity to work with a friend of mine to do public art. Down in Tucson, I did a really large public art project. And I learned a fair amount of the business of art kind of doing that in that process. My first teaching job was here in Santa Fe at the Institute of American Indian Arts. I was a sculpture professor for a year. And then I had an opportunity to go teach photography back at Oberlin College, which is where I went to college, because my friend had gotten the job there and he quickly got tenure and was then given sabbatical. So he got a year off. He called me up to kind of fill in for a year. And then I met my friend, Josh, who I'd actually gone to college with, and he had been doing public art around the country for a number of years. And he said, hey, would you like to apply for some projects sometime? And I was successful with him in getting this really large project in Tucson. So it was a $350,000 commission. And it was just kind of on a whim. And that ended up, you know, we built a small business out of that for 3 years in Tucson as we did this big mural project with a community called Barrio Anita. And maybe really quickly I could share that because I have images of that from my PowerPoint here. So I'll just zoom past this. Oh, that's the confluence of the Little Colorado and Colorado rivers there out extreme west nation. Let's see. So this is the project. It's a giant glass photograph that's a football field long and 20 feet high. It's made of 1 million pixels, and each one of our pixels is a 3/4 inch square of glass. So it's a giant Venetian tile glass mosaic. And we were working with an engineer to build us a robot, but that didn't work out. And so we had a programmer write a software that enabled, you know, hundreds of volunteers over thousands of hours to individually place each one of these the pieces of glass, right? Because a digital photo is just a bunch of squares of color. And so this software enabled us to kind of map that all out. But in the process of this, you know, we had to kind of create budgets and be responsible for paying ourselves and paying for all of the materials that created this mural. We had to pay rent and utilities. We created businesses, limited liability corporations, which are not that hard to actually put together. So those are business entities. We created bank accounts specific to those business entities. So anything that was kind of business related would flow through those entities. This is a mural project that we did in Philadelphia. It was funded by Lincoln Financial, and it's really about the legacy of slavery in the United States and emancipation. This is an interesting project. I took that same software and I downsized it. And so my grandmother, Martha City, I mean, she was a weaver, and I have one of her rugs. And instead of using a 3/4 inch square of glass, I used what we used, a 4mm square glass bead. And they have these beading looms that are designed just like Navajo stand-up looms. And we produced this rug called iDazzler. And this was before the Talking Tintypes application, but we wanted this to be a storytelling device as well. So yeah, I mean, this is it's about 3 by 5 feet, the actual textile or weaving. And then when you scan it, you're taken to this. So that piece was a commission, actually. I put it in an application with the Art in Public Places commission here for New Mexico, and we won a grant to put that together. And it was a collaborative project. So I was one of the artists, and Joy Farley, who's Danae, she was the registrar at the IAI museum here. And she's from Newcomb, and her sister, Pamela Brown, they actually started a weaving club in high school in Newcomb. Our friend Jamie Smith, who's Cherokee Choctaw, who's like a community organizer, and Dylan McLaughlin, who wasn't actually imaged in the video, but he's a Navajo filmmaker. And actually, I think he just finished at the University of New Mexico in their land arts MFA program. And I think his mom was maybe a VP at Saley at Dene College. McLaughlin, I don't know. But yeah. And so that was, kind of a document about the making of the rug. And then the language, my mom and an auntie of mine were talking about, weaving a two-faced rug. So a rug that has like a different pattern on each side. But in terms of like making a living as an artist, you know, I've had a few nice successes with public art applications. And something that I think a lot of people aren't aware of is if there's state funding for like a new building, uh, there's usually like up to 1% that's set aside for art, for public art to be part of the, you know, the structure, maybe on one of the walls or something, or it could be, you know, a big photograph or a painting or a weaving. I was actually, because I got tied in with the public art folks here in New Mexico, one of them approached me and said, there is this slush fund. There was about $200,000 because there were public projects that had happened in New Mexico, but they had happened on the nation, on Navajo Nation, and that 1% was just sitting there, and it wasn't being taken advantage of because nobody had a pool of Navajo artists to present to the body, or, you know, the government entity, to say, here, you know, choose this work. And so I kind of said, well, I can put together a group of artists. And so I, you know, went to every Navajo artist I knew and ended up, you know, getting about $200,000 worth of funds distributed to different artists. So there's things out there like that, you know, there's different strategies, I guess, to make a living as an artist.
Yeah, I'm really close friends with Bahi Whitethorn, and he always stresses that collaborative work with your peers, your friends, like other artisans, collaborate with them, build that relationship, that rapport with them. And he said that I went to the Naminha Institute last year out in Flagstaff, and we got to work a whole week with Bahi Whitethorn. And he was very supportive and encouraging, and especially the collaborative effort in the art world is needed. He was telling us that, because you can't just be centric in your work. You have to branch out and talk with other artisans and help and establish a community of artisans. And I think that is very powerful. And we're at a day and age where we do need that, the collaborative support of different artisans together, which can become a unit and be a force to reckon with. And that's just amazing that you're doing that, and you got $200,000 and did that. That was just sitting there, like you're saying.
I was sitting there, like nobody was taking advantage of it. And I was like, well, I can give you a list. And I do a little more than that. I contacted all these people and put together like portfolios and a statement about their work. And then I just said, here.
As among your works, which one is your favorite?
Oh,
just
God.
one.
That's a really hard one. I mean, I really love that weaving, I've got to say.
Yeah.
You know, I remember, you know, helping my family and my grandmother shear the sheep and clean the wool and tie the wool. And I never learned to spin, but that constant, like, kind of sound of the hand spindle is something that is always in my head. But yeah, I mean, I make weavings now, you know. I had the opportunity last year. There's an organization called the Native Arts and Culture Foundation, and they do a few things, but one of the things they do is they do these mentorship grants where they will identify kind of an established artist and offer them the opportunity to apply. And then, you know, as an established artist, you get to propose a project. And there's an IAI grad, Samantha Tracy. Her family's from the Keams Canyon area, but our project was to teach her how to do these glass weavings. And so we worked together. And yeah, now we work together on another kind of foundation together. So it was a cool way to kind of get some resources to do a project together, you know.
She's probably teaching her little nieces and nephew how to glass bead now. Weave rugs that way. They're probably selling at flea markets. That's so cool. Yeah.
Will, there's a couple of questions that have come in. I know Gabriella Cruz, who's our photography instructor here, she has a question. So Gabby, if you're on.
Hi, I'm Gabriella. I am the photo professor here at Dene College. I'm interested in that when it comes to like picking your subject matters. Like, how do you interview them? Do you know them? Are they all family? Is it just people like neighbors? And when you do pick them, how do you go about staying in contact with them? Like, do you create a specific tint type just for them personally? So that's, yeah.
Okay, well, with that project in particular, I mean, I started it during Indian Market here in Santa Fe because, you know, it's just a wonderful opportunity to be able to, it's like kind of a who's who of contemporary Native American art or indigenous art. And I didn't know a lot of the folks, but I kind of like, well, I put it out on Facebook. Now I would do it on Instagram too. And it's a free thing, and it's an exchange, right? And so if you sit for me and we make a tintype, you walk away with the original. So I give the original away. I give that to the sitter in exchange for a scan of it. And, you know, I take people's emails, I get a photo release, and on there is contact information. But now, because the project's kind of grown and taken off, and, you know, different institutions or museums will invite me for a couple of days. It really depends on the situation. Some, like I did it at the Denver Art Museum, for example, and there's a large, you know, Native community in Denver, and they wanted to reach out to specific people, and so the museum used it as an opportunity to kind of invite those people in. And that was a slower day, and maybe I only did like 4 or 5 portraits that day until, you know, everybody was happy with the image and they walked away with something. And then the next day it was completely open to the public. And so it was kind of like just a grind, you know. It was like, yeah, maybe I did like 80 or 90 tintypes that day, you know, and yeah, I was there for a week. But I've gotten the opportunity to do that project all over the world. And, you know, I think on one level, it's about an exchange, and it's about sharing, and it's about generosity, because I'm gifting the people the image. And I think, you know, when I first pitched the project, some people were like, you're crazy to give those away. You know, that's the thing. And I was like, well, no, that's the point. It's like about gifting and generosity. And it's like, what if Indians invented photography? You know, let's kind of flip the idea of what this is. And, you know, I don't know. I think because of that, it's really like people get excited about it and want to bring it to their site.
Because that's always the hardest part as an artist, is trying to find people to participate in your artwork. That's just the hard part. And I really do respect that, for you to just tell people like, you get to keep the original. Because that tintypes are just, that's it. You have one and that's it. So I'm happy to hear that you're not exploiting these people, that you're asking them to participate and be a part of this big project and this amazing project. I like that a lot.
Photography has overstepped in many times that colonizing, you know, area, and to like take that major first step and be like, no, we're going to do this project and you get to keep it, right? And this is yours. So thank you so much for really stressing about respect and reciprocal relationship building and establishing rapport with community building. And it's so important that we as Navajo people realize that we have to do that with our own community as well. So I think that's really awesome.
Indigenizing the photographic exchange. That's one of the taglines, right?
Talking about photography as a language, and Kayla did such a wonderful job bringing that to the surface. Thinking about it, it kind of reminds me, because, you know, we do have a lot of younger Navajos and even older Navajos who don't speak the language anymore, and we're able to find these very creative, artistic manners to create this new language, to bring together these two different monolingual speaking individuals, and somehow bringing them together. I know growing up, my Navajo wasn't that fluent, and so I butchered and I wove, and my grandmother didn't speak English. And so that's kind of like butchering and, you know, anything that really involved sheep brought us together. And so, you know, did your grandmother, what were her perspectives on your photography career choice?
It's interesting. I mean, I have this really specific memory of me kind of like really wanting to take her picture and kind of roaming around, and it was this interesting negotiation. And, you know, she knew what was up. And at some point she just said, all right, come on. And she, you know, but first she got, you know, she put on some nice jewelry and a nice shirt, and she took me outside, and I don't know, I think she even had a sense of like what light and what background she wanted in the picture. And she allowed me to, you know, it was like an interesting, I think, lesson for me to just, you know, I guess express a need and then be patient and allow things to kind of evolve on their own. But
Just listening to your grandmother's response for your passion and your early development of photography, and seeing how it creates this, you know, this vehicle of communication between the two. So it kind of gives me the warm and fuzzies, but I can totally relate to those areas. So Kayla, do you have any concluding or final question?
So I'm just thankful that you're willing to share all of your findings and your processes.
It's an honor to be part of it. And, you know, I hope this conversation continues. And then maybe once, you know, all of these COVID restrictions that we live with today are history, you know, I'd love to come out and do something with you all.
Heard that, Carla, right? All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and sign off of our Facebook Live event. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And we will be back in November for a whole new set of November conversations. And so thank you once again, Will. Thank you, Kayla. And we will see you guys in November.
Tegen go begaten ste heyana hey yanga. Nejana go wo begaten ste. Nejana go wo begaten ste. Nejana go tegen go begaten ste heyana hey